primarily as an undercover operative during his 20 years at the Bureau, to talk about some of the confusions and questions that we still have about this case. His book, The Pretender, details the extensive process of going undercover on the nation's top stealers of secrets. Marc Ruskin, thanks for joining me today. After reading the report by the Justice Department, they never mentioned the name of that foreign power. But if they're willing to turn him in, does that mean they're an ally of the United States?
Well, first, David, thank you for inviting me on to talk about these arrests and these false flag operations. There are a number of ways that these cases are initiated, and often it is exactly what you're referring to. The foreign power that's being approached by the wannabe traitor very well may be a friendly power. Sometimes the individual justifies it to himself or to herself, or makes it seem less severe in their mind by approaching a friendly power. One of my major cases that I worked of this type involved an individual who had access to nuclear materials used to enrich uranium, and he approached France or he thought he was approaching France actually, in order to sell these secrets. So that's not unusual that the power being approached is a friendly power, and it could. I have the impression from what I've read that that's what it is in this case. Now, what often happens, to their dismay, is that the power that's being approached tips off the FBI. In this case, the legal attaché. The FBI has about 70 officers outside the continental United States, and I myself worked in a few of them. And what they consist of are FBI agents, very few. The office I worked in was Buenos Aires, Argentina, and there were 2 FBI agents and 1 clerical worker who work and conduct investigations and liaison with the national police and intelligence services of that country. So in this case, it appears that the Office of the Legal Attaché at the U.S. Embassy was provided with the information about the approach from Toebbe. What's interesting here is that there was approximately, it seems like, 4 to 6 months between the time period that the foreign power received the approach from Toebbe and the time that it was communicated to the legal attaché office. So the speculation would be, in my mind, that they were probably deliberating as to what was the appropriate course of action. Would they pass it to the U.S., or would they perhaps act on it and initiate a relationship, a espionage type of covert relationship with Toebbe? Ultimately, apparently, they decided to play it safe from a diplomatic point of view and turn the information over to the Legat, who then passed it on to FBI headquarters, espionage unit in Washington.
Now, of course, the other side of the argument, could it also be countries like China and Russia, the adversaries of the United States, but out of avoidance of a bigger problem, they chose to hand Jonathan to the FBI?
I think it's unlikely that it was to avoid a global conflict. If it was a friendly power, then it was done. The decision must have been made and this was probably a decision made at the highest levels. It could have been made, I would suspect, that at a cabinet meeting in whatever country we are talking about, where the prime minister or president and the foreign minister would have discussed the pros and cons of either turning the information over to the Legat, to the FBI, or acting on it, and the diplomatic implications or the implications for peace or a global confrontation. If it was a hostile power, then I think it's unlikely they would have turned it over to the Bureau, of course. So in that case, it probably could have been used in order to enhance the likelihood of some kind of global conflagration. But in this case, it looks like that was not the situation. And avoiding a global confrontation doesn't seem at this stage to have been involved, a factor that was involved in the decision making, in my view.
So the question of, the individuals who are caught, are they approached based on an individual case, or is there a bigger market or a group that attracts them to sell state secrets?
Generally, these are individual, unrelated, specific, isolated cases. The way that the terminology utilized within the FBI and within the intelligence community for this kind of operation, from the law enforcement point of view, is a false flag operation. And it's called a false flag operation because the undercover agent is presenting himself or herself under a false flag. That is, presenting themselves. In my case, I worked for about a decade at the later stage of my career in the FBI, doing these types of cases, working as an undercover agent in false flag operations. Generally, the agents who work these cases are senior agents who have a lot of experience working undercover. Because of the sensitive nature, the risks involved in case that the operation is not successful. So, and the limited opportunities that the agent has to establish a relationship. Once the FBI learns that an isolated individual, such as Toebbe, or typically it will be a military officer with access to classified information, or a civilian working in a capacity such as an engineer or nuclear engineer in a research laboratory, they will typically approach a foreign power through whatever means that they can come up with. In the case that I worked on that involved nuclear enriching uranium, it was an individual, he approached the French consulate. He actually called the French consulate. So in some situations, and he also called some friends of his as well, asking for introductions to individuals in the French government. In that case, that individual, instead of contacting the French government, contacted the FBI. So in a typical false flag operation, the FBI will learn of the approach that's being made by this individual who has classified information and is seeking to sell it to a foreign power, sometimes hostile, sometimes friendly, usually hostile. The communication, from whatever means, is intercepted, and then an FBI agent such as myself will make the approach. So I would approach the individual pretending to be a high-level intelligence officer from that country, generally. So, and a high level because of to stroke the ego of this individual, because the information, the way it would be presented by myself is that the information is so important and you are so important that I have been sent, deputy director of intelligence for whatever country, in order to deal with you personally. And then, but there's usually just, there's one opportunity to make a good impression. If you don't succeed, that's the end of it. They'll clam up and you'll never be able to follow up. So it's a very sensitive and difficult type of case and requires someone who really knows what they're doing. If the individual bites and accepts an undercover such as myself as really being an intelligence officer from that country, then a relationship is developed, and over several months, the undercover will purchase classified information through a series of espionage type techniques using dead drops and other types of communication until there's enough evidence to make an arrest, as what has happened here.
Do you have an idea how many cases are caught and how many are missed?
In most cases, they will become public and lead to a public criminal prosecution, and a very long prison sentence for the individuals who are involved in the communication of the classified information. In most cases, we know how many individuals have sought to sell classified information to a foreign power, because they ultimately become public once the individual is arrested and a criminal prosecution is initiated. There are cases, however, where the whole operation is handled quietly without a criminal prosecution, where the individual may decide to cooperate or some other path is taken, sometimes because the prosecutors and the government doesn't want the information to become public knowledge, or the fact that this information was almost transmitted to a foreign power to become known. So there are cases which aren't publicized, and so they don't add up to what is known by the general public as having occurred. And as to how many of such cases escape the view of the FBI or of the government, that we can only speculate as to, in the hope that ultimately these individuals are uncovered. Sometimes it takes several years, with the most notorious cases, of course, being Aldrich Ames of the CIA and Robert Hansen of the FBI, who both operated for over a decade each as spies, as real actual spies for the Soviet, was then the Soviet Union. And of course, we know about spies, American spies who are selling classified information to other hostile powers, including China, of course. So, as to how pervasive the activity is, that's a matter of speculation. But to date, many of the very important spies have been caught and prosecuted.
Thanks for watching tonight's episode. If you enjoy the content, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below. Follow our social media on Twitter and many more. Before you go, here's something you should know. Don't forget to catch all of NTD's programs on TV. Talking Points premieres Mondays and Wednesdays at 11 p.m. Eastern on NTD. We broadcast on many of your favorite platforms, including Apple TV and Roku. We're also rapidly growing on cable, satellite, and over-the-air TV all across the US. Just go to ntd.com/TV, type in your zip code, and find all the ways you can watch. Take care. See you next time.